Thank you to Samara Wales in Los Angeles for sponsoring today's video. What is linear story structure?
A linear story structure to me is a bad thing because linear means in a line. And I don't think it's a useful mental image for a writer to have, to think of their story as being a straight line. I like to tell my students to think of it as a zigzag, because your purpose in telling a story and structuring a story is to try to keep ahead of the audience, keep the audience off balance. And I tell them to think of themselves, picture it as being more like you're like a broken field runner in a football game and you're trying to elude tacklers. You're trying to stay ahead of them, right? You're trying to zigzag. So that's a more useful mental image. Linear to me is, which is the way a lot of people teach you how to write, is there's a straight line. Here's where the end of Act 1 is. Here's where the end of Act 2 is. Here's the midpoint. Here's where and there's little hash marks that you've got to hit at a certain point. And it tends to make the story flat and predictable and straight. So I don't like it. I don't like it as a mental image. I don't have it in my head when I'm writing, and I encourage other people not to. I teach story structure from more of a Z, like a first act, second act, third act, so it looks more like a Z, because that's what it should feel like. You should feel like you're shifting gears and heading into another direction, shifting gears, heading into another direction. The three major acts, but within those acts, you're also going to be zigzagging. And look at any good movie and you'll see that there's twists and surprises in almost every scene. So, and certainly in between scenes, there's more twists and turns, but those three acts are the major ones. I don't like thinking of the process as being linear. You certainly can do it, but I don't think it's a useful image to have in your head. So
similar to what a Richter scale looks like, where it's just
yeah, sure,
it's all over the place,
right?
Unstable.
But of course, yeah, it'll feel like that to the audience, but you have, of course, a map. You know where it's going. That's the difference. Another way of looking at it is like you're going on a road trip, and I know I'm going to the audience is in the back seat. I'm the driver. You're the driver. The author is the driver. The audience is in the back seat, and they want to have a great trip. Well, I know I'm probably going to go from here to New York, but I don't know exactly how I'm going to get there yet. And you don't know how you're going to get there yet. And I may decide to go to the Grand Canyon, or I may decide to go up to San Francisco, and I may zigzag around a bit. We're all going to wind up in New York together, but I don't want you to know ahead of time where we're going. I want to keep you off balance. That's what happens next. If the audience knows what happens next, there's no reason for them to be in the theater.
I think you've said too, don't worry about what happened 20 years ago. Keep them, but unless it lends itself to the story.
Absolutely. It was David Mamet who said it originally. I think the quote was from Aeschylus to today in dramatic writing. Audiences have always asked one question: what happens next? Except for studio executives who ask what happened 40 years ago to make them do this. And his theory is no one cares. And he's probably close to right. Mamet takes it to an extreme. You often know almost nothing about the characters' pasts. He does that on purpose, and obviously Mamet's had enormous success. There are times, however, when learning about the past can be enormously effective as a powerful tool. However, if you're going to tell something about a character's past, there should be a reason for it. And my rule of thumb is when you learn something about a character's past, does it make you wonder more about the future? Having known that, oh my God, she once had an abortion. Oh my God, they used to be married. I didn't know that. Now what's going to happen when they show up for Thanksgiving dinner? Then it's a useful piece of information. But if it's just information to have information, why bother? The audience isn't wondering. Or if they are, let them wonder. The more important thing is what happens next.
Can we talk more about how you envision story structure as a Z?
Yeah. Story structure to me is best seen as a Z when we're talking about especially those three acts. 1, 2, 3. Because each one of those turns, usually people call them now turn from 1 into 2, or turn from 2 into 3. Some people call them plot points. I always liked using the term pivot point because that's what the story should feel like it's doing. It's spinning off into a new direction. And almost every story, movie story, good story, is told in 3 acts. Almost every one. They may be subtle sometimes, but they're there. In my estimation, what determines the distinction between Act 1 and Act 2, or Act 2 and Act 3, is when the character's goal shifts. So we're going along this way. The protagonist has a goal in relation to the central conflict. Something happens to cause that goal to change and spin the story in a new direction, so that the protagonist now has a new goal in relation to the central conflict. And then the same thing happens at the end of Act 2 and spins you into 3. And the reason why you need it and why it's important is again, your audience antenna tells you, that after about 20, 30 minutes, the audience is going to start to get restless. They've had enough of that. As fun as it was, it's time for something new. So for example, in The Fugitive, at the end of Act 1, I would often ask the question, and people would say, oh, it's when he escapes, when the bus crashes and the train hits it and he escapes. That's like 5 minutes into the movie. That's the inciting incident of The Fugitive. The end of Act 1 in The Fugitive is when he's lying in the forest covered in leaves. He's been running and jumping and chasing and run through the tunnels and got trapped on the dam and jumped off the dam and landed in the river. Everybody thinks he's dead. He crawls onto land, he covers himself in leaves, and he has a dream. He sleeps and has a nightmare. And he remembers all the stuff that has happened to him, and he remembers him yelling at the cops, "Find that man," meaning the one-armed man, "Find that man." And Andrew Davis had it echo 3 or 4 times so that we didn't miss the point. And then he wakes up, and what does he do? The next shot is he's heading back to Chicago to find the one-armed man. And that's the beginning of Act 2. It happens almost exactly 1/3 of the way through the movie. Because he now has a new goal. And what happens to the audience is, well, it was fun watching him run away from Tommy Lee Jones, but now we're ready for something new. Oh, now he's going to try to find the one-armed man. That's going to be different. That's going to be fresh. What a new set of challenges. The flaw in The Fugitive, in my estimation, is the end of Act 2 and the turn into 3 when he's defeated the one-armed man, and that tension has gone away, and now he's trying to capture the real bad guy, which is his doctor friend, which is not nearly as much fun as the first 2 acts. But nonetheless, it's a very clear end of Act 1, beginning of 2. I like to teach from Jaws a lot because it's a movie almost everybody's seen. And it's such a neat, nice, clean structure. What's the central conflict? The small-town sheriff has to try to keep a predator shark away from his coastal town, some version of that. Act 1, what's Chief Brody doing? He's trying to keep the shark away. He's trying to put up signs that say stay off the beaches. He's trying to watch to see if he sees any fins. He hires people to do that. He puts a bounty on the shark. Nothing works. Then the shark goes into the pond, attacks his kid, and now he looks out at the ocean. Spielberg pushes into the ocean, and we cut to him saying, to the mayor, you gotta let me go find and kill the shark. Okay. Beginning of Act 2, I've got a whole new set of problems. This guy who's afraid of the water has to go find and kill a shark. Oh boy, that's going to be fun to watch. And it is fun to watch. And then the end of Act 2 is a little more subtle. It's when the engine conks out, they're stranded in the middle of the ocean, and there's a hard cut to the 3 faces of the guys who know they're stuck. The radio's been smashed, they are stuck out here, and now all they're trying to do is survive. How are we going to survive the shark, which is trying to kill us? So Act 1, stay away from the beach, keep the shark away. Act 2, find and kill the shark. Act 3, survive the shark. 1, 2, 3. Within that, all kinds of interesting things are happening, of course, but those are the 3 major movements of Jaws. And when you look at it like a Z, it helps you see that those shifts keep the audience just behind the story, playing catch up the whole way.
Yeah, it seems like in the first few, there's like power struggles, and then by one of them, all bets are off. They don't care about power struggles. They have their own internal need to do whatever it is in the film. I don't know.
The 3 characters, the 3 main characters?
It just seems like in a lot of films, there's like certain power struggles, and there's opposing forces, and there's egos and different things, but then by a certain act, people of just all bets are off, no one cares about that. It's the main character's will against anything, and they kind of don't care anymore.
Possibly, yeah. In the case of Jaws, interestingly, the character stuff works because it affects the story, and they stripped a lot of stuff out of the book. In the book, the character played by Richard Dreyfuss has an affair with Chief Brody's wife, and they took it out because they didn't feel like it was necessary, and they were correct, I think, in doing so. That was almost sort of a melodramatic subplot We don't need it. This is a movie. Let's get going. Let's keep going as fast as we can. And so the actions of the internal struggles of the characters were reflected in the story. So, for example, the radio gets smashed. The plot requires us to have a radio smash so they can't radio for help. It gets smashed because the Robert Shaw character is so enraged and so determined to do it his way that he smashes the radio so that they can't call for help. But that was set up in the internal dynamics between the characters. And yes, by the third act, all they were trying to do was survive the shark any way they could.